What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our Big Ten football channel.
It's a good time to talk some Nebraska football. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. As you dig into the videos here, you'll find that we bring the best in discussion, debate, and analysis. And we're talking Huskers with Parker Gabriel from Husker Extra. Parker, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me back, Mark.
Absolutely. Thank you. You're doing the work for us here. We appreciate you stopping by. And of course, the spring game is coming up Saturday, April 13th. So before we get started on who's breaking out, what the storylines are, do we have a concept of what the spring game is going to look like in regards to, we have our various forms of tackling, no tackling, offense versus defense and such?
Yeah, it's Scott Frost made it pretty clear this week. He said we're gonna play football, so it's gonna be a full scrimmage, live tackling. Think we'll probably running clock in the second half, that sort of thing. But it's gonna basically be a game. It's at 1 p.m. on Saturday. They have a 2-hour window on Big Ten Network, 1 to 3 Central Time, and so it's gonna be a real game. I think that there's a bunch of guys, and we can get into this, but there's a bunch of guys who I think fans would have liked to have seen play that aren't going to. Some skill guys, J.D. Spielman, the top receiver on the team, Wan'Dale Robinson, one of their prize recruits, Maurice Washington. Those guys are both minor injury type situations. Maurice Washington's had this court proceedings going on in California for some time, been limited all spring. He's not going to play. So there's some sizable names that aren't playing in the spring game, but I think you'll see, the starters sort of play about a half, some maybe a little less, some maybe a little more, and then backups and walk-ons sort of take it the rest of the way home.
On the line with Parker Gabriel from Husker Extra, talking Nebraska football here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. So what have the storylines been in regards to emphasis on improvement on both sides of the ball?
Yeah, it's been, I think, a lot of the storyline here this spring's been about the defense, and they finished near around 100th in total defense and scoring defense in the country last year, and I don't think anyone expects them to be a top 10 group, in the fall, but a jump just into the 50s, if they got in the top 50 or 60 in the country in defensive efficiency, and I think they were about 60th in takeaways last year. If they get that, a 20 or 30 spot improvement in both of those categories, given what, this offense should be able to do with Adrian Martinez at the helm, would sort of line up for a big jump, obviously, from 4-8 last year. So I think the way the defense is played, there's been pretty positive reviews overall of improvement along the defensive line. And that's great, but it's also necessary. I mean, they just didn't, they had some guy. They have a lot of returning production on the defensive line, but it needs to, or a lot of returning minutes on the defensive line, but the production needs to be a lot greater this coming year than it was last year. It's a graduate transfer from Oklahoma State. Darian Daniels is the older brother of Damian Daniels, who's also on the defensive line. That's really like if he's a real true impact player, and they get a step up in production from the 6 or 7 other guys that they have in that group that have played in the past, they could be an average or maybe even above average defensive line in the Big Ten, and they have to be in order for Nebraska to make the kind of strides it wants to make in 2019.
And again, if I remember, based on our conversations and what I had seen online following the 2018 season, this was a defensive pass rush that was bottom 2 or 3 in the Big Ten with only about 14 sacks. Now, of course, that's a statistic that can be skewed, but it gives a pretty strong indication to production or lack thereof.
Yeah, it does. And for Nebraska, in a 3-4, it's defensive line and outside linebackers in tandem, and it's really that front 5. And the thing that they haven't been able to do since I've been covering, the last 2 seasons for sure, and even going back a little further than that, I think, is they just haven't been able to get pressure with 4, or 5. It's always been too often they've had to bring an extra, pass rusher to get any heat on the quarterback, and that you're leaving yourself exposed, obviously, if you know that you have to bring 6 to get to the quarterback. You're the offenses are too good this day and age to be able to live with that regularly. And so The goal for Nebraska, they've got a new defensive line coach this year, Tony Tuioti. Just got here before spring ball started. Mike Dawson left for a job with the New York Giants. So Tony Tuioti likes where they're at. You're right on the sacks number. It can be a little bit subjective. He talks about, we got to affect the quarterback, disrupt the quarterback. They're going to have to do that a lot more often this fall than last fall.
Does this team and the coaching staff and Scott Frost, I'm sure they do, realize that they're considered a bit of a dark horse in a positive light, that they could take a huge jump or a significant jump in terms of wins total and contention in the Western Division?
Yeah, I think they sense that opportunity. I mean, I think last year, they got demolished at Michigan late in September, and then after that, they lost to Purdue by 2 touchdowns and Wisconsin by 2 touchdowns and Northwestern in overtime. But really, I mean, those 3 games, I think you saw the fine line, maybe not in the final margin, except for the Northwestern game where they were up by 10 with 2 minutes left. Nebraska was. I think you saw that they weren't a long ways off from competing with those teams, and that's the meat of the Western Division. They beat up Minnesota. I think a lot of Nebraska players and fans probably watched them, beat Minnesota by 25 points and then realized that Minnesota not only qualified for but won a bowl game, and thought, that's sort of that middle group of the Big Ten West. I mean, then they lose to Northwestern or at Iowa on a last-second field goal. I mean, the West is going to be really wide open, and that doesn't mean that Nebraska is a favorite to win it or anything like that. But I think that, really, if you're any team in the West, you feel like it can be there for the taking. And I don't think Nebraska is any different in that conversation.
So, Parker, to make that kind of jump, obviously some players will need to step up. Who are the guys that you're looking for during the spring game to see if they've made that kind of a leap?
Well, I mean, funny as it is, I mean, I think Adrian Martinez falls in that category, even though he wowed a lot of people in his freshman year. He put up big numbers, but that jump for him from being, maybe among the better freshman quarterbacks in the country to being among the better quarterbacks in the country, there's still a lot of room for improvement for him, even though he did things as a freshman that no freshman quarterback in Nebraska has ever done. And he was, he was the top freshman in the country in terms of total yards per game last year, total offense per game. And so, he's one of them. I think that they have some young guys. Cam Taylor's a corner/safety defensive back that they're going to use a lot. I think they can use him in a sort of a multi-purpose role. He's one of their kind of cornerstone guys on defense. And then a guy who's not going to play in the spring game, but I really think Wan'Dale Robinson, sort of an all-purpose back. He's dealt with a minor hamstring issues sort of over the course of spring ball. Hasn't been 100% except for maybe the first day. And he sort of left, there were a bunch of guys after that first day that said, oh, keep an eye on this guy. He draws comparisons to Rondale Moore because he's from the same area. They work out together. They're similar stature, that sort of thing. Obviously, Rondale Moore had 113 catches as a true freshman at Purdue. So let's not just say that that's what's going to happen with Wan'Dale. But I think you can look at it and make the argument that after J.D. Spielman, given the question marks that are in that running back room right now, Wan'Dale Robinson might be their second most important skill player after J.D. Spielman. I don't think that's too much of a stretch, and he's out here in January.
Well, it's still just Nebraska versus Nebraska. You get the win, you get the loss. Maybe a little bit more interesting, important, and intriguing of a spring game than what we've seen the first few weeks of the spring session across the country because of the late run and the close efforts against some of the best teams in the Western Division, the huge win over Minnesota, et cetera, and just the growth and development expected and a reality on this football squad. So I think this is one that actually is worth watching.
Yeah, I think it is. There's never a lack of interest, and if you're, and if you just turn on the TV and you want to see something that's become more and more of a novelty in today's day and age, you can turn it on and see 87,000 people at a spring game. I think that's something Nebraska takes a lot of pride in. Probably some schools around the country that would look at that and say, "Whoa!" I mean, it's just it's almost bizarre in its own right, but in a good way. that they've sold out. They sold out the spring game in 48 hours this year, 24 hours last year. So it's going to be a full house. It's live on BTN. There's a bunch of players that aren't playing, and there's no quarterback battle, so it doesn't maybe have the same zip that you might have some years, but people around here care about it an awful lot.
Thank you for watching this video. If you're a Big Ten football fan, please subscribe to the channel. Leave us your thoughts down in the comments below. And for the latest in Big Ten football, keep it right here.